This game is not what you think. Silent Hill F isn't just another horror story. It's a slow, psychological breakdown of a girl who's being crushed from every direction. And the worst part, most of what you see isn't even real. This is the full story of Silent Hill F. So let's break it down. The story begins in 1947 in a hidden Japanese village called Ebisugaoka. This place looks peaceful on the surface, but underneath, it's controlled by ancient beliefs, rituals, and unseen forces. Here, we meet our main character, Hinako Shimizu, a strong, rebellious girl who doesn't fit in anywhere. She's not like other girls. She prefers playing like boys, acting tough, and refusing to follow social expectations. And because of that, she's completely isolated. Girls mock her, boys don't accept her, and at home, it's even worse. Her father, Kanta Shimizu, is extremely strict, cold, harsh. He doesn't show love, he doesn't show emotion, he believes fear creates strength. So instead of raising Hinako with care, he pushes her away, constantly, and Hinako hates him for it. Her mother? She's passive. She follows whatever the father says. No support, no protection. So Hinako grows up feeling completely alone, except for one person, Shu, her childhood friend. The only person who treats her like an equal. Not like a girl, not like a problem, but like a partner. And this one relationship, it becomes the most important emotional anchor in her entire life. Now here's where things start getting darker. As Hinako grows older, her family situation gets worse. Her parents fight constantly. The house becomes unbearable, and this is when Hinako starts developing chronic headaches. But these aren't just normal headaches. They represent something deeper: stress, suppressed emotions, mental breakdown. Instead of solving the root problem, she turns to medicine. At first, normal medicine, given by Shu, which helps a little, but not because of the medicine, because she's finally expressing her feelings, talking, releasing pressure. But then everything escalates. Shu creates something dangerous, a special flower-based drug called Hakokuso, a rare plant introduced to Japan long ago. Difficult to grow, almost unnatural. He turns it into red and white capsules and gives them to Hinako. He thinks he's helping her, protecting her from overusing random medicine, but this decision changes everything because Hinako becomes dependent, not just physically, but mentally. She starts using these capsules more and more, and slowly, reality starts slipping. Now jump forward to 1960. Hinako is now older, and her life is about to collapse completely. Her father is drowning in debt. He borrowed money for a failed business. He drinks daily. He's angry all the time. And then, a solution appears. A wealthy family, the Tsuneki family, one of the most powerful families in the village. Their heir, Kotoyuki, he wants to marry Hinako, not out of love, but because of something deeper, something supernatural. In exchange, they will pay off all of her father's debt completely, and her father accepts without asking her, without telling her the truth. To him, this is salvation. To Hinako, this is betrayal. She believes her father sold her, like an object, like a transaction, and this moment breaks her completely. She loses trust in her family, in her life, in everything. And what does she do? She turns to the only escape she has left, the capsules. She starts consuming them excessively, over and over again, trying to numb the pain, trying to escape reality. But instead, she falls deeper into it because these capsules aren't normal. They connect her to something else, something ancient, something divine, and something horrifying. And this is where Silent Hill F truly begins. Because from this point forward, you can't tell what's real anymore and what isn't. Because Hinako's world is about to split into two, reality and the divine layer. And once that happens, there's no going back. But here's the real question. Was Hinako ever in control, or was she being led from the very beginning? This is where everything breaks. Not slowly, not subtly, completely. Because the moment Hinako loses control, the world around her starts changing, and not in a normal way. Reality begins to rot, literally. The village of Ebisugaoka starts transforming into something unrecognizable. Flowers begin to grow everywhere, but these aren't beautiful. They're disturbing, flesh-like, infected, almost like the environment itself is alive, watching, breathing, and reacting to Hinako. Now remember this carefully. Everything happening from this point has two layers: the real world and the divine world. And the scariest part, they overlap, so you never know which one you're actually seeing. Now let's talk about what's really controlling all of this. The village isn't normal. It's built on ancient beliefs. One of the most important is Inari, a divine entity connected to foxes. In this village, foxes aren't just animals. They are messengers, guardians, and sometimes something much worse. Years ago, when Hinako was still a child, she saved a girl named Kotoyuki from a fox. At that moment, something noticed her, something powerful. The fox recognized Hinako as a divine girl, chosen, marked, and from that day, she was never normal again. At the same time, Kotoyuki's life also changes because he becomes connected to the fox's influence, controlled, guided, almost possessed, which explains something important, why he wants to marry Hinako. It's not just a social arrangement, it's part of a ritual, a divine plan, something much bigger than both of them. Now let's introduce another terrifying concept, Tsukumogami. This belief says that objects, after existing for a long time, become alive. They gain souls, and if they're neglected, disrespected, they turn into something dangerous, spirits, cursed entities. And in Hinako's case, there is one object that matters, a doll, a normal looking doll, but it was never properly discarded, never respected, and because of that, it becomes something else, a vessel, a living entity, and this entity attaches itself to Hinako, not to protect her, but to control her. So now think about this. Hinako is being influenced by three forces, the fox deity, the divine power of Hakokuso, and the Tsukumogami entity. Three different powers, all fighting over one person, and that person is already mentally unstable. Now the hallucinations get worse, way worse. Hinako starts seeing things that shouldn't exist, rooms that stretch infinitely, spaces that don't follow logic, people acting like shadows of themselves, and bodies distorted, broken, merged with flowers. It's no longer just psychological horror, it's full transformation. And here's the twist, all of this might still be happening inside her mind, because the game heavily suggests that the dark shrine world she enters is not a physical place. It's a manifestation, a mental dimension created by trauma, drugs, and divine interference. But even if it's in her mind, it doesn't make it any less real, because she feels everything, every fear, every pain, every loss of control. Now let's go deeper into the marriage ritual, because this is the core of everything. Hinako isn't just being forced into marriage, she's being prepared for transformation. The idea is simple. She becomes the bride, but not in a normal sense. She becomes something symbolic, a vessel, a union point between human and divine. And during this process, something horrifying happens. Hinako begins to split. Two versions of her start to exist. One is the real Hinako, confused, scared, fighting for control. The other is a darker version, a version influenced by divine power, corrupted, emotionless, almost like a puppet. And both of them exist at the same time. Now this is important because this isn't just a visual effect, it represents her internal conflict. Her identity is literally breaking apart. One side wants freedom, the other is being consumed, and the more she resists, the stronger the divine forces become. Now let's talk about Kotoyuki again, because his role becomes even more disturbing. He isn't just a victim, he's also a participant. He tries to save Hinako, but at the same time, he's part of the system controlling her. He represents something dangerous, control disguised as care. He believes he's helping her, but in reality, he's pushing her deeper into the ritual. And this creates one of the biggest emotional conflicts in the game, because Hinako doesn't know whether to trust him or fear him. Now everything reaches peak chaos. The divine world fully takes over. The fox entity reveals its true nature. The Tsukumogami begins asserting control, and Hinako is forced into a final confrontation. But not just with them, with herself. Because the biggest enemy in Silent Hill F isn't a monster, it's identity. It's the question of who you are and who you're becoming. And at this point, Hinako is on the edge of losing that completely. So the real question now is, when everything is controlling you, what does free will even mean? This is the moment everything collides. Not just the story, Not just the horror, but Hinako herself. Because now, there's no escape. The divine world fully consumes everything. The village is gone, replaced by a distorted nightmare. The sky feels dead, the ground feels alive, and every step Hinako takes feels like she's sinking deeper into something she can't control. Now the final phase begins, the confrontation. But here's the twist. This isn't a single fight. It's multiple battles happening at the same time. Different layers, different enemies, different versions of reality. First, the Fox deity, the true force behind everything. It finally reveals its intention. Hinako was never randomly chosen. She was selected because of her nature, her strength, her defiance, her emotional instability. All of it made her the perfect vessel. The fox doesn't just want control, it wants transformation, a new form of existence, and Hinako is the key. At the same time, the Tsukumogami entity takes action. The doll, the forgotten object, now fully awakened. It tries to take over Hinako completely. Unlike the fox, it doesn't want partnership. It wants domination, full control, no identity left, just a puppet. And this creates chaos, because now both entities are fighting over her. And right in the middle of it, Hinako splits again. Two versions, one human, one divine, and both are forced to fight. Now this is where the game becomes psychological warfare, because the real battle isn't external, it's internal. Hinako is forced to confront everything she's been running from, her anger, her pain, her loneliness, and most importantly, her hatred for her family. This leads to one of the biggest revelations. Her father, Kanta Shimizu. All this time, Hinako believed he was a monster, a cruel man, a selfish father, but the truth is different. He was strict because he was afraid of the world, afraid of losing control, afraid that kindness would make his family weak, so he chose harshness. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to show it. And this realization destroys Hinako emotionally, because it forces her to question everything she believed, her anger, her resentment, her identity. Now she faces the final decision, reject everything or accept everything, because both paths have consequences. If she rejects, she risks losing herself completely. If she accepts, she risks becoming something else, something beyond human. Now the climax begins. The two Hinakos confront each other, one representing freedom, the other representing submission. And instead of destroying her darker self, Hinako does something unexpected. She accepts it, not as an enemy, but as part of herself. This is the turning point, because the moment she does that, everything changes. The control of the fox weakens, the Tsukumogami loses influence, the balance shifts, and for the first time, Hinako regains control. Now the final battles happen simultaneously. Divine Hinako versus the Fox deity. Human Hinako versus Tsukumogami. Two fights, two outcomes, one identity. And after an intense struggle, she wins. Not by overpowering them, but by understanding herself. And this is the key message of Silent Hill F. You don't defeat your trauma by destroying it. You defeat it by accepting it. Now the curse breaks. The village is freed. No more divine control. No more forced rituals. No more sacrifices. Kotoyuki is finally free as well, no longer controlled, no longer bound. And here comes the final emotional moment. He still wants to marry Hinako, but this time it's different. No pressure, no control, just a choice. And Hinako, she refuses, not because she hates him, but because she finally understands something. She needs to live for herself, not for her family, not for the village, not for destiny, for herself. And this is the true ending. Hinako doesn't suppress her darker side anymore. She doesn't run from it. She accepts it. Both sides, light and dark, yin and yang, now merged into one, complete. And for the first time in her life, she is free. But here's the unsettling part. Even after everything, one question still remains. Was all of this just psychological? A result of trauma and drugs? Or did something truly divine actually exist? Because Silent Hill never gives you a clear answer. And maybe that's the point. Because the real horror is not knowing what was real and what wasn't. So after everything Hinako went through, after all the pain, all the transformation, all the truth she uncovered, there's still one question left. Did she escape the nightmare? Or did she finally become part of it? You think the story is over? It's not. Because Silent Hill F isn't just a story, it's a layered psychological puzzle. And if you only look at the surface, you completely miss the real meaning. So now we go deeper, much deeper, because everything you just saw has a second interpretation, and this one is way darker. Let's start with the biggest question. Was any of this real, or was everything happening inside Hinako's mind? The game never gives you a direct answer, but it gives you clues, a lot of them. And when you connect to those clues, a disturbing theory forms. Everything, the monsters, the divine world, the transformations, might all be manifestations of Hinako's mental state. Let's break it down. First, the headaches. They weren't just random. They started when her family situation got worse. Constant fighting, emotional pressure, isolation. This is classic psychological buildup. Now add something else. Drug dependency. The Hakokuso capsules. These aren't normal medicine. They alter perception. They affect reality. And Hinako was abusing them heavily, which means her mind was unstable even before the supernatural events began. Now combine both mental trauma plus substance abuse. This creates the perfect condition for hallucinations, distorted reality, false environments. Now think about the Dark Shrine, a place that doesn't follow logic, a place where time and space break, a place filled with symbolic imagery. That's not a physical location, that's a mental construct, a representation of her subconscious. Now look at the enemies. The Fox deity, what does it represent? Control, manipulation, external pressure. It pushes Hinako into a role she never chose, just like her family did, just like society did. Now the Tsukumogami, the living doll, what does that represent? Neglect, forgotten emotions, things you ignore that come back stronger. Hinako ignored her feelings, her pain, her anger, and instead of processing them, she buried them. So they returned as something monstrous. Now the split versions of Hinako. This is the most obvious symbol, identity, fracture. One side wants freedom, the other is shaped by pressure, expectations, control, and the more she struggles, the more divided she becomes. Now let's talk about the marriage, because this is not just a plot point, it's a metaphor. Hinako being forced into marriage represents loss of control over her life, her future decided by others, her identity reduced to a role, and her reaction? Complete mental collapse. Now everything starts making sense. The horror isn't random, it's structured. Every monster, every environment, every event is connected to her psychology. Now here's the most disturbing interpretation. The divine elements might not be divine at all. They might just be her brain trying to make sense of trauma by turning it into mythology, because it's easier to accept something as fate than to accept that your life is falling apart. Now let's go even deeper, the timeline, because something doesn't add up. In the game, Hinako is said to be 15 years old, but based on evidence, she might actually be 18 to 20. Calendars, events, character behavior all suggest a longer timeline. So why the inconsistency? Because memory is unreliable, especially under stress. Hinako might not even remember things correctly, which means what we see might not be the actual sequence of events, but a reconstructed version, filtered through her broken perception. Now let's revisit her father, because this changes everything. At first, he's the villain, strict, cruel, emotionless. But later, we learn the truth. He cared in his own way, but he didn't know how to show it. And this is important because it reveals something about Hinako. She wasn't just a victim, she misunderstood things too. She built her identity around that pain, and when that belief breaks, her entire world collapses. Now think about this. If her perception of her father was wrong, what else was wrong? What else did she misinterpret? This opens the door to a terrifying idea that maybe even the horror she experienced wasn't entirely real. Now let's talk about the ending again, because it's not as simple as she wins. When Hinako accepts her darker self, it looks like healing, growth, freedom. But there's another way to see it. She didn't eliminate the darkness, she integrated it, which means it still exists inside her. And that raises a dangerous question. Did she overcome the horror, or did she become capable of living with it? Because those are not the same thing. Now here's the final layer, Silent Hill itself. In previous games, Silent Hill is a place that reflects your mind, your guilt, your truth. And Silent Hill F follows the same pattern, which means the village isn't just a location, it's a mirror. Everything Hinako sees is a reflection of herself, and that's why the horror feels so personal, so specific, so targeted, because it is. Now step back and look at the full picture. A girl, isolated, emotionally broken, dependent on drugs, facing forced life decisions, losing control, and slowly losing her sense of reality. That's not just horror, that's a psychological collapse. And everything else, the gods, the monsters, the rituals, might just be the way her mind chose to survive it, or the way it chose to fall apart. So after everything, after all the layers, all the interpretations, all the possibilities, there's still one question that refuses to go away. If the horror was inside her mind the entire time, then what's more terrifying? The monsters she saw, or the reality she was trying to escape from? You think the true ending is the real ending? That Hinako is finally free? Yeah, that might not be true, because Silent Hill F doesn't have just one outcome. It has multiple interpretations, multiple endings, and some of them are way darker than what you've seen so far. Let's break them down. First, the acceptance ending. This is what we talked about earlier. Hinako accepts her darker self, balances her identity, breaks free from divine control, walks away from the forced marriage. Sounds like a happy ending, right? But look closer. She doesn't destroy the darkness. She keeps it, which means it's still there, dormant, controlled, but never gone. This ending isn't victory, it's coexistence. Now let's talk about the second outcome, the submission ending. This is where everything goes wrong. Instead of accepting her identity, Hinako gives up. She stops resisting. She lets the divine forces take over. The fox deity wins, and Hinako becomes exactly what they wanted: a vessel, a symbol, a bride not just in ritual, but in existence. Her individuality disappears. Her personality fades. She becomes calm, silent, almost empty. And this is the scariest part, because from the outside, it looks peaceful. No struggle, no pain, no conflict. But inside, there's nothing left. This ending represents something real. When people face too much pressure, sometimes they don't fight. They shut down completely. Now the third outcome, the collapse ending. This is pure chaos. Hinako loses control entirely. She doesn't accept herself. She doesn't submit. She breaks completely. Her mind fragments beyond repair. Reality and hallucination fully merge, and she can't tell the difference anymore. In this ending, there is no clarity, no resolution, no identity, just endless distortion. She becomes trapped in her own mind forever. This is the darkest psychological outcome because it represents total loss of self. Now here's where things get even more disturbing. There's a hidden interpretation, not officially confirmed, but heavily implied. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What if Hinako never escaped? Think about it. All endings happen inside the same distorted world. We never see a clear return to reality. We never see confirmation that the outside world is normal again. Everything we experience is filtered through her perception. So what if the freedom ending is just another layer, another illusion? Her mind creating a sense of closure so she can survive. Because that's something the brain does. When reality is too painful, it creates narratives, endings, resolutions, even if they're not real. Now connect this to the drugs. Hakokuso, heavy usage, hallucinations, distorted memory. What if Hinako never actually fought gods? What if she never split into two? What if everything was a prolonged psychological episode, and the ending is just her stabilizing slightly, not escaping, just adapting? Now let's go one level deeper. The role of Kotoyuki. Because he might not be what you think. In some interpretations, he isn't a villain, but he's not a hero either. He represents control disguised as kindness, a system that looks gentle, but still takes away freedom. And depending on the ending, Hinako either rejects that system or becomes part of it. Now think about the village itself, Ebisugaoka, a place controlled by belief, by tradition, by expectations. That's not just a setting, that's society. And Hinako's story is about breaking out of it, or failing to. Now here comes the darkest theory. The entire game is a metaphor for loss of identity under pressure, family pressure, social pressure, cultural pressure, mental pressure. And the horror is what happens when a person can't handle all of it. Now reframe everything. The monsters are not enemies, they are symptoms. The divine forces are not real. They are interpretations. The entire game, is not about survival. It's about collapse or transformation. Now here's the final twist. Even in the best ending, Hinako doesn't return to who she was. That version of her is gone forever. She becomes someone new, stronger, more aware, but also more damaged. Because once you go through something like that, you don't go back. You only move forward, changed. And that's what makes Silent Hill F different. It's not about escaping horror, it's about what horror turns you into. So after all the endings, all the theories, all the interpretations, there's still one final question. Not about the game, but about you. If you were in Hinako's place, would you fight to stay yourself, or would you become something else just to survive? Alright, now we remove all confusion. No theories, no symbolism, just the most logical, reconstructed timeline of what actually happened, step by step. Because Silent Hill F is messy on purpose. And if you don't organize it, you'll never fully understand it. Let's start from the beginning. 1947. Hinako Shimizu is a child living in Ebisugaoka, a remote Japanese village controlled by old beliefs. One day, she saves a girl named Kotoyuki from a fox. This moment is critical because this is when the marking happens. The fox recognizes Hinako as special, a divine candidate. At the same time, Kotoyuki becomes connected to that same force. So from childhood, both of them are already tied to something bigger. Now move forward. Hinako grows up. Her personality becomes more defined, strong, rebellious, doesn't follow gender norms, which causes social isolation. At home, things get worse. Her father becomes increasingly strict. Her mother remains passive. Family tension builds slowly over years. This is important because the psychological damage doesn't happen instantly. It accumulates. Now we reach her. Teenage years, around 15 to 18. This is where contradictions begin. Officially, she's said to be 15, but evidence suggests she's older, most likely 18 to 20 during main events. Now the headaches begin. Triggered by stress, family fights, emotional pressure, she starts seeking relief. This is where Shu becomes important, her only emotional support. He listens, understands, helps her express herself. At first, that's enough, but then she starts taking medicine, regular medicine from shops. Over time, usage increases. Dependence starts forming. Now Shu intervenes. He creates Hako Kuso capsules, red and white pills made from a rare flower. His intention is good. He wants to protect her from harmful overuse of random drugs. But this backfires, because Hinako starts relying on these capsules even more. And these are not normal. They have psychoactive effects. Now we enter the early 1960s. This is where everything accelerates. Hinako's father is in serious debt. Business failure, alcohol addiction, constant anger. The household becomes unstable. Then comes the turning point, the Tsuneki family proposal. Kotoyuki wants to marry Hinako. In exchange, all debt is cleared. Her father accepts immediately. Important detail, Hinako is not properly informed. She only finds out partially, specifically about the money involved. So from her perspective, she was sold. This is the emotional breaking point. Everything she feared becomes real. Loss of control, loss of identity, loss of freedom. Now her behavior changes drastically. She increases capsule consumption, heavily. This leads to distorted perception, hallucinations, emotional instability. At this exact stage, the shift begins. Reality starts blending with hallucination. Now here's the key clarification. This is not a sudden supernatural event. This is a gradual transition. Her mind begins constructing the divine world, based on village beliefs, fox mythology, Tsukumogami concepts, personal trauma. So the dark shrine world begins forming. Now we reach the core event, the marriage ritual phase. This is where everything overlaps. In reality, Hinako is being forced into marriage. Mentally, she interprets this as a transformation ritual, a loss of humanity, a forced identity change. So her brain converts it into divine possession, spiritual merging, becoming a bride of something inhuman. Now the split happens. Two Hinakos. This is not physical, it's psychological. Her identity divides into to self that wants freedom, self that is adapting to pressure. Now the hallucinations intensify. Environment distortion, monsters, non-linear spaces, all representing internal conflict. At the same time, external reality likely still continues. People are still there, events are still happening, but we don't see it clearly because everything is filtered through her perception. Now we reach the climax phase. This is where the internal conflict peaks. Hinako confronts her fear, her anger, her trauma, her identity, and most importantly, her misunderstanding of her father. She realizes he wasn't purely cruel, he was flawed, emotionally limited, but not evil. This realization destabilizes her previous beliefs. Now comes the critical decision point: acceptance versus rejection versus collapse. Depending on mental outcome, acceptance leads to integration of identity, submission leads to loss of self, collapse leads to total fragmentation. Now the ending. In the most stable version, Hinako integrates both sides, regains control, rejects forced marriage, walks away. But important detail, we do not get confirmation of full external reality, so the safest conclusion is this: the core events, family, marriage, stress, are real. The divine horror layer is a psychological interpretation. Now final piece. After everything, Hinako is no longer the same person. Her identity has changed permanently, not destroyed, but restructured. And that is the complete timeline. No confusion, no gaps. Just a girl who was pushed too far and had to rebuild herself in the middle of a nightmare. Now that you know the full sequence, there's only one thing left to ask. Was this story about supernatural horror, or was it always about something much more real? Now we go beyond the obvious, because Silent Hill F hides its best details in places most people never notice. Small things, background details, throwaway moments. But when you connect them, they completely change how you see the story. Let's start with something subtle: the flowers. At first, they just look like environmental horror, creepy, disturbing. But look closer. They don't grow randomly. They spread more aggressively when Hinako loses control. Every time her emotions spike, the world becomes more infected. That's not coincidence. That's a visual indicator. The flowers represent emotional overflow, specifically repressed feelings breaking through. And the fact that they look organic and flesh-like, that's intentional, because her pain isn't abstract anymore, it's physical. Now the next detail, the color of the capsules, red and white. This is not random. Red represents intensity, emotion, pain. White represents suppression, control, numbness. And Hinako consumes both, constantly, which means she's stuck in a cycle. Feel to suppress to feel to suppress. Never actually processing anything, just looping. Now let's talk about the sound design. Most players focus on visuals, but the audio tells a deeper story. There are moments where background sounds distort, voices echo, ambient noise stretches unnaturally. This isn't just for horror, it represents cognitive breakdown, her brain failing to process reality properly. Now here's something almost no one notices: mirrors. Whenever Hinako is near reflective surfaces, something feels off. Either her reflection lags, looks slightly different, or feels disconnected. This is a classic psychological symbol: loss of identity. She literally can't recognize herself anymore. Now let's go deeper. The doll. Most people understand it represents Tsukumogami, a possessed object. But there's another layer. It's not just any object, it's something neglected, forgotten, unresolved. That's exactly what Hinako did with her emotions. She ignored them, didn't process them, didn't properly discard them. So they came back, alive, stronger, hostile. Now here's a detail tied to time: calendars. Dates appear multiple times in the game, but they don't always align. Days skip, sequences don't match. At first, this looks like a mistake, but it's not. It represents memory distortion. Hinako isn't experiencing events in real time, she's reconstructing them out of order, which is exactly how trauma works. Now pay attention to this. The environment sometimes loops. Corridors repeat, areas reconnect in impossible ways. This is not just a horror mechanic, it's a mental trap. She's stuck in thought loops, repeating the same ideas, the same fears, over and over again. Now let's talk about Koto Yuki, because his behavior changes subtly. At times he seems caring, at times distant, at times almost emotionless. This inconsistency isn't bad writing, it's perspective shift. Hinako doesn't see him clearly, she projects onto him. Sometimes he's safety, sometimes he's control, sometimes he's a threat, which means we're not seeing Koto Yuki, we're seeing Hinako's perception of him. Now, one of the most disturbing hidden details, the letters. There are references to other girls, other sacrifices, other brides. This suggests something huge. Hinako is not the first. This has happened before, which reinforces the idea of cycles, repetition, generational patterns. And that connects back to the real theme, people repeating the same mistakes over and over. Now here's something extremely subtle. Hinako's posture and movement. At the start, she moves with confidence, strong, direct. But as the game progresses, her movement becomes slower, more hesitant, almost like she's being pulled. This is physical storytelling, loss of control over her own body. Now the biggest hidden detail, the ending choice itself. Most people think it's a decision moment, but there's evidence suggesting the ending is determined long before that, based on her mental state throughout the game. Meaning, her fate isn't decided at the end, it's built over time. Every small reaction, every emotional shift, every moment of resistance or surrender, all of it adds up, which mirrors real life. You don't suddenly become strong or weak, you build towards it. Now step back. Look at all these details together. Flowers reacting to emotion, capsules representing internal cycles, distorted sound reflecting cognition, mirrors showing identity loss, objects representing suppressed feelings, time showing memory damage, environment showing thought loops, characters showing perception bias. This isn't random design, this is precision. Everything in Silent Hill F is built to reflect one thing, Hinako's mind, which means the entire game world is her. And that leads to a terrifying realization. You're not exploring a haunted village, you're exploring a person. So after noticing all these hidden details, after connecting all the pieces, there's one final question that hits harder than anything else. If the entire world is just a reflection of her mind, then what happens? If that mind completely breaks? This is the final layer, not the story, not the horror, but the meaning. Because Silent Hill F isn't trying to scare you with monsters. It's trying to show you something uncomfortable, something real, something most people avoid thinking about. And that is this. What happens when a person loses control over their own life? Everything in this game points back to that one idea. Hinako was never just fighting creatures. She was fighting pressure from every direction. Family, society, expectations, identity. And the scariest part? None of those things are fictional. They exist in real life. Now think about her situation. She grows up in an environment where she can't be herself. She doesn't fit in socially. She doesn't feel safe at home. She has no control over major life decisions. And when things get overwhelming, she turns to escape. Not solutions, escape. That's the capsules. That's the hallucinations. That's the entire divine world. It's not just horror, it's coping. But coping in the wrong way. Now here's why the game hits so hard. Because it doesn't exaggerate the problem, it translates it. It turns emotional pain into physical horror. So you can't ignore it. You can't look away. You're forced to experience it. Now let's talk about identity, because this is the core theme. Hinako doesn't know who she is, and everyone around her is trying to decide for her. Be a proper girl, follow expectations, accept your role. Get married, obey your family, and every time she resists, she's punished, socially, emotionally, mentally. So what happens? She starts breaking, not because she's weak, but because she's being pushed in multiple directions. And that creates the split. Two versions of herself, the one she wants to be and the one she's forced to become. Now here's the key message. The game doesn't tell you to destroy one side, it tells you to understand both. Because real identity isn't pure, it's not one thing. It's complex, conflicting, messy, and the moment you try to suppress one part completely, it comes back stronger. That's the Tsukumogami. That's the doll. That's the forgotten things returning. Now let's talk about control, because this is where the fox comes in. The fox represents external forces, things that manipulate you, guide you, push you into roles. Sometimes they look helpful, sometimes they look protective, but they still control you. And the scary part? You might not even realize it. Now here's the final realization. Hinako doesn't win in the traditional sense. She doesn't fix everything. She doesn't go back to a perfect life. She changes. And that's the point. Because in real life, you don't erase trauma. You carry it. You learn from it. You adapt. And hopefully, you grow. But that growth comes with a cost. Now let's answer the biggest question. Was the horror real? It doesn't matter, because the impact was. The fear was. The pain was. Whether it was supernatural or psychological, Hinako experienced it fully. And that's what defines reality in Silent Hill. Now let's bring everything together. A girl loses control of her life. She tries to escape. She breaks. She confronts herself. She rebuilds. And in the end, she walks away. Not healed, not perfect, but aware and stronger than before. That's the real story. Not about ghosts, not about gods, but about identity and survival. Now here's why this game stays with you. Because it doesn't give you comfort. It doesn't give you clear answers. It leaves you thinking, questioning, reflecting, and maybe even seeing parts of yourself in it. Because at some level, everyone has felt pressure. Everyone has felt lost. Everyone has struggled with identity. Silent Hill F just takes that feeling and turns it into something you can't ignore. So after everything, all the horror, all the layers, all the meaning, there's only one final question left. Not about Hinako, not about the game, but about you. If your entire world started breaking apart and you had to choose between losing yourself or becoming someone completely different, what would you choose? Subscribe for daily gaming content, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.